This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod.
And welcome back, Art of Darkness, artofdarkpod.com. I am Brad Kelly. This is Kevin Kautzman. You are joining us in the Dark Room. And for people who haven't listened before, the Dark Room is sort of our breakout session. We do these core episodes, these in-depth, multiple-hour profiles on a various artist, say John Berryman, and then we scour the internet to find the best people we can to talk about that subject in a sort of a somewhat less structured, but hopefully just as entertaining and informative way.
Yeah, this is how we gather our own victims, our own poetic.
I'm honored to be considered an expert on it too. Yeah.
Hey, right. Man. Yeah. Hey, it's the internet. We all decide what we are. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yesterday, I was an immunologist. Today, I know about Central Europe and Eastern Europe.
Exactly.
Tomorrow, I'm going to know all about electoral politics in Finland.
Anybody's got a hurricane question, you come to me.
Come to this guy. Hurricanes don't do that.
Right. So Andrew Wittstadt of the Heavy Board podcast, poet, writer, podcast host, obviously. Thank you for joining us.
I'm sorry. His bio on Twitter says, what does it say? It says poet, writer, genius.
Yeah, there you go.
Listen, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, plant your flag.
Damn right. I respect it.
It's a pleasure to meet you guys. Yeah, I've been a fan, and
welcome.
we've been bouncing around each other too. It seems like for years in terms of all the other podcasts and things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's great to be.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And we're glad to have you on. We're part of the same podcast party circuit for sure. Before we dive into it, we got a couple things to promote. We'll do that really quickly. First of all, Kevin's moderation play.
Moderationplay.com. You have 4 more opportunities to see this player if you are anywhere near the Twin Cities or you want to fly in. All right. October 3rd to the 13th. It's already October 8th. So we're doing this Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Sunday's a matinee. Moderationplay.com. This is happening at The Hive in St. Paul, Minnesota. Tickets are cheap, $5 off. Tickets, use code BADMOUTH. You're not going to want to miss it. We had really, really good houses up until the matinee. The matinee was very slow, but still, it was good. Actors have a way of doing things, and we can't let the actors have 5 days off. We can't. It'd be a disaster. But really, it's been awesome. It's a 2-hander, 90 minutes. Incredible to watch my 2 very talented actors pull off what they do. And people have been buzzing. Some people have been in from out of town to see it, and it's just been really, really cool. So if you are in town, moderationplay.com, check that out. And then the second thing, Brad, I have coming. Well, we have a few things coming up. We have book club this Saturday. We're doing Left Hand of Darkness. That's for Patreon and Substack.
Oh, that's the 19th, not this Saturday. The 19th.
The 19th. Sorry. The following Saturday. So the 19th. Time is getting away from me. And then, of course, we are doing the Uncanny Death of Harry Houdini in Hamtramck, Michigan on October 26th. Tickets are on sale now. Go to artofdarkpod.com. How's that? Housekeeping good?
Yeah, that's great. Boom. That's great. Come see us. That's going to be fun. So let's get into this. John Berryman, we did an in-depth episode on him, I don't know, 2 years ago, I think now at least. And it was a subject that I didn't know really anything about before we jumped into it. It was a sort of friend of ours suggested it, and I did some scratching below, kind of scratched the Wikipedia, and I was like, oh, this is a good one. And now, Andrew, like you said, we've been kind of in each other's periphery, at least on Twitter for a while now. And the first time I came across you, I saw heavy board, and I was like, well, I know exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us? I mean, first off, I guess tell us a little bit about your podcast. We should just do that up front. And people, and let me give my shout out. I've been listening to it for the past couple of weeks, and I really dig it, man. But definitely sell it to people.
Yeah, so Brad is the reason for the bump in downloads then, it went from like
Okay.
6 or 7 a day to like, yeah.
Okay. That's
Yeah,
me.
but totally.
Yeah.
It's a lot like this, although definitely nowhere near as in depth as you guys go, like it's more just kind of hanging out, book club. I would call it book club kind of, but it's more than that too, because we do like interviews, and then I even do like solo stuff where I just kind of give like reviews or my thoughts on things.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's essentially a podcast that I like to say centers around me and then literature and pretty much everything in between too, because we don't shy away from movies and stuff like that. I know you guys don't either. Like you guys are just
Yeah.
all art, which I think is fantastic. And I mean, that's the beauty of podcasting too, really, is just no limits. I mean, we can do whatever we want on this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
and people will listen for some reason. And then then all of a sudden I get introduced as an expert and I'm like, yeah, so listeners
Yeah.
out there, just start a podcast. And then
The reason is that they want to form a parasocial relationship as a kind of bulwark against the crippling alienation of contemporary life in the West as
Nailed
as
it.
things fall apart. Yeah, nailed it. I'm the same way. I binge listen to podcasts all the time. I've become a big fan of the Book Club from Hell since
Mhm.
going on their pod and getting to know those guys. It's just great. It's really fun. We call it the podcast party circuit. It's a good time. I'm going to check. And Andrew, I'll confess, I haven't listened to your pod, but I will. I will this very evening. I swear. Is there would there be
you
a
heard
good
it here,
episode?
listeners. Yeah, you heard
Hey,
it.
let's get Andrew the Art of Darkness bump. Okay, all right, let's make it happen.
Yeah.
But no, tell me what would be a good episode to start with?
Ooh, good episode to start with. Some of my favorites that I've done recently. I love the Romeo and Juliet that we just did with another mutual friend of ours, Brendan from Tales from the Mall podcast.
Mhm. Yep. Let's do that.
I did Harold Bloom's The Anxiety of Influence with another mutual of ours, Yerk from
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Eastro Californian podcast, and of course he has a great Twitter account. Everybody should follow. Those are good. I have one that'll probably be out by the time this comes out. I just did an interview with Nick Flynn, the poet, which is a great time, and I'm sure that'll be out here by the time this one comes out. So go look at that one too. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So definitely people go check that out. Heavy Board. It's Heavy Board Pod as the Twitter handle, and we'll have Andrew's Twitter handle in the show notes as well. So I guess because the show is called Heavy Board, that's maybe a place to start. Why Heavy Board?
Why Heavy Board? It's interesting
Yeah.
because I started the podcast with a friend of mine who had since decided that the podcasting arts was not for her. It's a lot of labor of love there for a while, forever it seems
Yeah.
like. And
Yeah.
we were both really into Berryman, and we were like, oh, what should we call this? Kind of a weird book club podcast where we're just kind of talking about books. And for some reason, my mind instantly went to Heavy Board. It's just one of the best phrases I think ever written in terms of poetry. And I just is like that, I think would encapsulate it. Like everything we're trying to do is like, well, being bored of great literature, all that, and being bored by it, but also like extremely interested by it at the same time. Like it's this weird kind of dichotomy. But yeah, that's where the name
Yeah.
comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get that. It's funny. A mutual friend of ours, I went on Rare Candy Gain of Fiction recently, and we were like, let's read some, Glenn and I were talking, let's read some Roberto Bolaño. And I was like, that sounds awesome, but we have to read like whatever his shortest book is. And it's still great, but it's kind of the same thing. It's like, man, I literally cannot read 2666 right now. There's no way that's happening.
Yeah.
So yeah. So what is for you the draw of John Berryman? What makes him so noteworthy? What makes him worth talking about? What is it, 50 some years, 53 years, 52 years since he passed away? But what is the draw of John Berryman? What's the appeal?
Yeah. Well, I first got introduced to Berryman when I was in undergrad I had a really great teacher. Shout out to the poet Leslie Harrison. And she really kind of took me under her wing, and then she used Berryman in one of the classes I was taking with her, and it really kind of blew my mind. And since, I've just been searching for something like that. And I often say this on my podcast, and I'll say it again here, where I think his dream songs are just kind of the most innovative work of American poetry we've had since in the 20th century, at least the second half of the 20th century there. Like it just nothing's come close to what he did with the Dream Songs, kind of how kind of avant-garde it is, but then also how it just works. You know, so much avant-garde stuff is just bad. Like it's just kind of like people, fucking around doing shit. And it's like, okay, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I mean, I know you guys do this too, or just I always encourage people to try things, go for it. Yeah, even if it doesn't work.
Sure.
But his just works. And it's just like this kind of hypnotizing thing he was able to do with these what, like over 300 Dream Songs. I mean, a lot of people speculate that it drove him crazy, but yeah, I think, and
Yeah.
I can see how that happens. That could happen easily. I mean, you guys create art projects, you
Yeah.
know that you can get really deep in the woods with some of those things and just not find your way out. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, just the innovation that's on display in this is just unparalleled by anything else that's come after. Like we're kind of, I don't want to say stuck culture or anything like that, right? Get into the memes already, but just
Yeah.
incredibly original and innovative. And I've just been searching for something like it since. And it just gave me a huge, deep meaning. Like I try to do some of that in my own work, like, and mostly fail at it. But yeah,
Yeah, that's
just,
I guess what I guess I wanted to ask you next was sort of influence on you as a poet, and we're all influenced by people, but sometimes it's difficult when a very strong voice like Berryman's is one of your influences because it can be very difficult to get out from under him. Do you find yourself sort of actually, tell us a little bit about that specific influence on your writing and if that's easy, if that's inspiring, if that's challenging.
yeah, I mean, definitely. He's definitely one of the strongest influences on me. And I would say, like, when I was in my 20s, kind of writing books of, like, unpublished books of poetry, it's like, there was a time where I was completely stuck with it, just obsessed with it and couldn't get past it. But with time, with kind of moving away and then moving back, kind of the ebb and flow of creativity and kind of discovering new things and constantly being on the lookout for it. Um, I think I have kind of gotten over at least like the suffocation you can feel from being so overwhelmed by like one of your favorite influences and things like that. But yeah, for
Yeah.
me, I mean, the character stuff that he was doing in the Dream Songs was again unparalleled by I think I mean, and there's been some contemporary poets that have done that or tried to or have come close. I'm thinking like Khaki Wilkinson's Winona Stone poems and stuff like that that just have like who was the one? Oh, I forget her name now. So of course, when it's time to record and put it out to the world, I can't plug it for her. But it was the one about it was like those birds, and it was about like a bird where like the main speaker in the poem has like this pet bird that like has a name, and
Oh,
she's like talking to it the whole time, and it's kind of that I think you could see the Berryman influence in that as well. Just a new level of poetry where I mean there's always been like characters and things like that in poetry, especially if we go all the way back, the epic poetry and things. But yeah, that's I feel like it's so much of poetry, especially contemporary poetry, is confessional work now. And people try to
mhm.
hide that it's not confessional work, but I mean, it is. They're writing about themselves and how they feel, which is fine. I mean, I think Berryman probably does that in the Dream Songs too, but
Oh yeah.
just taking it to the next level, like taking it to that new innovative level where it's like, yeah, like just throw something crazy in there, like talk to
Yeah.
somebody that's not there,
Yeah.
talk to a
Yeah,
fictional character.
I always think that the confessional mode in poetry or whatever is kind of fine, but you still have to be saying something that nobody else has really said, whether that's just how you frame something, how the metaphors, the language you use, but like you still have to it still has to feel unique to the writer, in my opinion, or what are we even doing here? Right? Like if
Yeah.
anybody could say it, kind of what's the point? Um, do you want to share with us a dream song? Anyone that kind of jumps out at you? I know they're all pretty short. I mean, if people who are maybe not familiar with this, it's a huge compendium of poetry, but every one is less than a page, and they all move very quickly. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess he wrote what, 385
I
in
think so. And
total?
I don't know if that counts. I was looking through some of the biographical material again yesterday, and apparently when he was like done, he couldn't help himself but write more because to him, a
Right.
dream song, I mean, it's a poem, it's a poetic sort of, I don't know if you'd even call it form, but to him, it was like a specific mode that you could either be in or not be in when you were writing a poem. So he was
Yeah, for
stuck in it for
sure.
a little while
Have,
afterwards, apparently.
have you guys felt that? I mean, like when you get, I think like Adam Johnson said that as well when he wrote The Orphan Master's Son. And then like
Mm,
his next his short story collection went Fortune Smile that came out after that. There were like a couple short stories that were basically still about North Korea because he was just
mhm.
kind of in that mode of just like writing stories and like about North Korea and like with those
Yeah.
characters and what's happening in that world. And like
Yeah, I
I,
have a couple like register, I would call it a register that I like get into that it gets a little obsessive sometimes. And I have
yeah,
to like as I've sort of matured as a writer, I use it on purpose now, whereas it used to like metastasize and take over everything. So, yeah, I know that feeling.
Oh yeah, I'll hallucinate a draft of a play in like under 2 weeks, ideally. The draft. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you just straight up hearing voices.
right.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, I don't know
It's
any other
fun.
way to do it. I mean, yeah, it
That's
feels like
fantastic. Yeah,
moderation. Yeah, moderation. It feels like somebody else wrote it because I wrote that 5 years ago, and somebody else did. I'm a different person from 5 years
exactly.
ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think getting better and better at your craft, you're able to kind of switch gears and still function. Some of us, like to a degree. Some people can't. Some people
Yeah.
can't handle life. Life
Yeah.
is very hard. And I feel like Berryman might have been one of those figures where just the nerve was just too exposed to the surface.
I
Yeah.
think there's some truth to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
it's a learning curve as well, right? Like when you're getting into this and like you could let yourself be consumed by it, but also kind of learning how to pull yourself away from something once you're done with it, you know, like that's something they don't teach you in the creative writing classes or anything like that. Like it
Mhm.
just kind of I guess because you do only experience it when you're getting like really obsessed with something and creating something. But yeah, man, I mean, sure. I mean, the dream songs, there's so many. Like I confess I didn't make it through all of this. I was pretty busy,
Yeah,
but
oh, it's
I
a lot.
was I read it a few times before, but I was like, all right, I got to get through like at least half of this, and I did. But there's just so many. Like at one point, I was writing down poems. I was like, oh, let's hit this one, this one. I was like, all right, this is too many. Like we're not going to be able to hit all these. But I ended up for people that don't know, yeah, this is basically Berryman's kind of innovation in terms of the sonnet form. And not so much the Shakespearean sonnet with again the 14 lines, more of the Petrarchan or the Italian sonnet with 18 lines. So most of these, some don't, some break those rules, right? Uh, they're mostly all 18 lines in total. And the rhyming is a little skewed. Like he's not really following all the rules, but he's kind of breaking the sonnet form using these. At least, you know, that would be like the academic approach to it. But
Mhm.
I say, fuck it. You guys want to start with Dream Song
Yeah.
14?
14. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, the namesake of my podcast for
Yeah.
yeah, there we go. Uh Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. After all, the sky flashes, the great sea yearns, we ourselves flash and yearn, and moreover, my mother told me as a boy, repeatedly, ever to confess you're bored means you have no inner resources. I conclude now I have no inner resources because I am heavy bored. Peoples bore me. Literature bores me, especially great literature. Henry bores me with his plights and gripes, as bad as Achilles, who loves people and valiant art, which bores me. And the tranquil hills and gin look like a drag, and somehow a dog has taken itself and its tail considerably away into mountains or sea or sky, leaving behind me, Wag.
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
like it's just, it has the quality of something quasi religious. It's like sort of, like a,
It-
like a Tao, like the Tao of modernity,
And it
you
kind of
know?
goes nowhere, right? Like it kind of like
Right.
ends up with this like image of the dog, but just that first line I think always draws people in like when they hear it. It's
Right.
also part of like the theme song to my podcast as well. I took like
Yeah.
actual like readings of him reading it. I scrubbed it off the
Yeah.
internet and put it in there so I wouldn't get hit
Right.
with
Right.
copyright infringement. But
Right. It
yeah,
works perfect. Oh, well, no, I mean that first line, I mean, one of the things that's, I think this is a something that has been sort of mastered actually in contemporary stand-up comedy, sort of, is this thing that everybody that it's a little cliche to even say it. The thing that everybody thinks but nobody says, which is that first line, life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Now that doesn't mean it's not also glorious and like a million other adjectives. But one thing about life is sometimes it's boring as hell, right? And you
yeah,
have to figure out a way to cope with that aspect of life. And everybody has different ways that they've done that, right? I'm not bored usually because I've basically made myself so busy that I'm insane. So, but there are different ways of approaching it, right?
Well, and when you think about it, the amount of effort and energy in terms of the economy, what we spend, most of our energy goes toward not being bored. I mean, a lot of energy goes toward that. I mean, we're
Mhm.
all, yeah, social media
Yeah.
is just, we're just fighting
Yeah,
boredom
dopamine, dopamine,
together.
dopamine,
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 dopamine.
yeah,
dopamine. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
And it's
sure.
something that like it's something that's said all the time. I mean, maybe more so like 20th century literature. You didn't see people straight up saying stuff was boring, although Oscar Wilde and stuff would say it in his
Mhm.
own way. Uh, kind of turned the century there. But like I was thinking like when you guys were talking, just like the DFW, like this is the famous "This is water," right? Like it's mainly about a speech about life being boring and like monotonous, right? Like and how you have to
It's a
kind
good
of
point.
deal with that. Like there's just this constant theme, especially maybe just in like 20th century American life or Western life where we are all so like, life isn't that really that difficult, like for a lot of us, if you have a job or
Mhm.
whatever. I get it can be really difficult for some people, whatever, but it's
Mhm.
just like
Yeah.
there is like you're looking for
We're
things
not, we're
there.
not fending off wolves in the night.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Like you
Right.
watch
You
some
know,
TV and go to sleep, repeat, right? Like
right, right.
Yeah.
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 Hmm.
it's just
The, there's
The
a
word
line in here that,
wag,
go ahead.
well, hang on. The word wag is
Yeah.
very interesting as well. I was reading the etymology of it, and it has to do with swaying, comes from the Old Norse, and it relates to the word cradle. And one
Hmm.
wonders how far Berryman, do you know? I mean, how etymological was he? I imagine he was probably pretty studied. And a wag is somebody who tells a joke, right? Or somebody
Well,
who's
that
witty
too.
is a
Yeah.
wag, you know? And what does the dog do with, if it's happy, it wags its tail. So I don't know, there's a lot happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brad, what were you saying?
Well, no, that's a great point. I was curious about that because I'm left with an image, but I don't know not to overly dissect things because that's kind of not the point either. But I'm left with this image, and like Andrew, you said, it kind of goes nowhere. And at the end, I'm sort of like, I don't know what to do with that image exactly. I know it's there. It's kind of, you know, I don't know. It works though, which is kind of how a lot of these poems, these dream songs work.
yeah, I've been
Let's do.
fascinated with
Go ahead.
oh sorry, no.
No, go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, I've been fascinated recently because I was talking about it on that Anxiety of Influence episode because we were doing Harold Bloom and he's going huge swaths of literature and stuff. The guy was a genius, but like
Mhm.
I just all of those things do work for it, right? But this kind of the idea of language where there's something known in it just by learning the language, you're learning all these other contexts on top of it and stuff and being able to read in the language. And like poetry is that, I mean, fiction does this too, playwriting, all this stuff, dialogue and movies, right? Like they capture something, even if it doesn't quite make sense on the kind of like point A to point B kind of logical progression. Like there's a meaning conveyed even through just using the terms. So even like the term
Mhm.
wag, you can pull all these different things out of it. And I mean, I would say Berryman probably did it very intentionally like that. He was a studied guy. Like, I mean,
Oh yeah,
I think his PhD work was all on Shakespeare and stuff. Like
yeah,
he
Yeah,
loved
so
Shakespeare, this
he
guy's,
would
yeah.
know the multiple meanings of that word.
I
Oh
Yeah.
would
yeah.
think
Oh
so.
yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Oh
Hmm.
yeah.
yeah.
I was actually scrolling through some of I downloaded a book, Berryman Shakespeare, which somebody has basically brought together his various essays and lectures on Shakespeare, and it's interesting stuff for sure. Like he was no slouch. There was a point where he was going to put out like a definitive edition of King Lear was the
Oof.
project that he put a lot of energy into and never. I think the reason it didn't come out is somebody else did it like 3 months before him, so he was like done practically, and there was no point.
He
So, but
just
yeah,
had to jump off that bridge.
yeah,
Just like,
exactly,
oh
exactly.
no.
Somebody puts out your book right before you. That's pretty rough. Yeah.
We just found out that Ben Stiller is doing a pickleball comedy called The
Oh my
Dink
God.
about a young tennis
Oh
washed up
no.
tennis star who tries to win his father's approval by playing pickleball. We wrote a comedy called Pickleball about a
Yeah.
young man trying to win his father's approval by playing pickleball.
Oh my God.
I'm gonna call Dan Ball. Yeah, I'm gonna rope after
Sue
this.
him.
It's just
Yeah,
my
sue
life's
him.
work, Andrew. The pickleball script. No, I'm obviously not as serious, but no, really, we were both like, "Oh, come on, man, we gotta get that script circulating." The
For
phone, the
sure.
line is open,
Yeah.
Stiller.
That's what it means is that
Yeah.
you're in touch with the ether of the culture. Like you
Yeah,
guys
that's
are like
right.
you're 100% like you're feeding on that same wavelength, and that's what's always
Andrew,
so
Yeah.
that
interesting. Yeah.
doesn't pay the bills,
True.
man.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
It doesn't.
Well, but I'm talking to a poet, so here
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, of
yeah.
course. Of
Brad.
course.
Andrew, is there another dream song you want to read and we'll see where we
Oh
go with it?
man. Oh man, there's so many. I mean,
Yeah, just pick one.
Dream Song 4 is always great
Okay.
too because it's about, lust and love and shit. And then I mean more than that
Yeah.
too, with all of that.
Oh yeah, I like this one. Yeah.
Yeah, another one of the more famous ones, yeah. Because it does tap that little everybody's felt this, at least, if you've felt human emotions in terms of attractiveness or attraction to someone. So, filling her compact and delicious body with chicken paprika, she glanced at me twice. Feigning with interest, I hungered back, and only the fact of her husband and four other people kept me from springing on her or falling at her little feet and crying, "You are the hottest one for years of night." Henry's dazed eyes have enjoyed brilliance. I advanced upon, despairing, my spumoni. Sir Bones is stuffed, de-whirled with feeding girls, black hair, complexion Latin, jeweled eyes, downcast, the slob beside her, feasts. What wonders is she's sitting on over there? The restaurant buzzes. She might as well be on Mars. Where did it all go wrong? There ought to be a law against Henry. Mr. Bones, there is.
Yeah. Where did it all go wrong? And I think about if you if you haven't listened to, and you're doing, these are wonderful readings, Andrew, but if you
Oh,
haven't
thank you.
listened to John Berryman read the poetry, go look on YouTube. It doesn't even matter what he's reading. Everything is epic when John Berryman's reading it.
He's usually hammered too. Yeah.
Oh,
Like
he's usually
absolutely
just
hammered. Yeah.
totally hammered. He probably doesn't remember it at all, but like, yeah. Um, there's a couple of things going on in that one that I think are interesting to talk about. I mean, one is his use of black dialect, which is problematic kind
Here
of
we
now.
go. Yeah.
Which I don't really want to get. But I like if you do read like a 2024 think piece on John Berryman, they will spend a third of it at least talking about that, right? But I don't want to bring it up to even think about like the identity politics aspect of it. But what's interesting, one of the things that's so potent about these dream songs is the way Berryman is like shifting gears in in uh in I guess register, mixing this sort of formal and informal and slang and dialect and sort of constantly switching between these in ways that are sort of unexpected. Like when uh we get that he just moves from Bones starts talking and says, "Is stuffed the world with feeding girls." And if you just read this poem in isolation and you hadn't read any of the other dream songs, it would be very confusing as to what the hell was even going on there. What can you tell us about Henry and Mr. Bones?
Oof. Well, I mean, there's a lot of speculation about it too, and he's always insisted that they're fictional, they're not him. And I think because
Yeah,
the confessional works were so big at the time when this came out, right? The original came out in 64, I think,
I think that's right.
till
The first
77.
77 came out there. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
was the height of, life studies by Lowell, Plas Ariel, like Anne Sexton books, like these kind of the big confessional greats were all putting out stuff. And he was I think he was very much friendly with like Lowell and stuff. But I think that this is why I always kind of, I mean, I like confessional poetry, but this is why I always rail against it too, is because I think it has consumed almost all interpretation of literature now, where people use
Yeah,
it this kind of Freudian reading of like, oh, this is what they really meant by saying, talking about this. Um, but yeah, I mean, Henry and Mr. Bones, I think it's I guess it's probably definitely him in terms of everything that came out of your head is part of you, right? Like, but
Mhm.
I mean, I wouldn't say that he's like trying to hide behind them or that they're like some type of like characters for himself or because I mean he's always denied it, but I mean again, it's kind of up to our interpretation on that. But yeah, I
sure.
think you're
Yeah.
right about that, where he's going back and forth with the kind of yeah, the black dialect, the black scent, right? Like that's like
Mhm.
in there because it is just it juxtaposes. I mean, one, the syntax in this is all over the place, but it's also kind of juxtaposes the standard English in a way that's kind of like really musical. Like it's so beautiful with using the English language to kind of like slur the words to fit the rhyme. Like that's basically the essentially slant rhyming, right? But then like,
Mhm.
you know, you see this more in rap music and stuff nowadays than you do in poetry, but like slurring a word to slant rhyme it like is one of my favorite parts about like rap and hip hop music. Like
Mhm.
listening to like Vince Staples, I think is fantastic at that, you know. Uh and I think I always to defend Berryman, I guess I've kind of put myself in a position where I am kind of always defending his work because there has been that kind of like they want to deface what was done in the book because of using the identity politics as a justification. But I always say, like, you know, read it in a more positive way. Like, he probably thought that this was beautiful, that this was a great use of the English language, and like he
Mhm.
wanted to use it artistically in this work. I mean, uh, how else can you, when you read through it here too? Like, I mean, it's not like this guy was like some horrid, like, you know, hardcore conservative or something. I mean, he
Right.
was definitely like a college professor, you know, like it's
Yeah.
Yeah, the
I always
University of Minnesota, famous for being a conservative school.
right. Right.
Oof.
I mean I always assumed it was Berryman like basically saying that the
Go
poetic palette
Gophers.
is everything. Go go.
Sorry, Brad. Go Gophers. I'm sorry. Go on. Go on.
No, I was just saying I always took this stuff as Berryman saying that basically everything is in the poetic palette.
right.
Like black vernacular and like the most elevated of Victorian poetry could be in there or whatever. It's all part of it. And this is where I think and like maybe you guys can tell me if this seems crazy or not. But so John Berryman, when he came upon the mode of the dream song for like a year, 9 months or a year, he'd been doing intense dream analysis on himself. So he'd been like his major pastime was writing down and analyzing his own dreams. And then one day this just tipped over into writing this kind of poetry. And so I kind of think of these almost as like waking dreams. And one thing that dreams do is they just take whatever is at hand and like collage them into something else that has a meaningful coherence. So in this case, it's whatever words and whatever meter and whatever rhythms are sort of floating around get seized and drawn into this thing. Um, and I think that's why, I mean, I think that the title Dream Songs is very, very, very consciously done. I think it's very much on purpose. I think somebody could call any poem a dream song, I guess, right? But um, these are a very particular sort of way of looking at the world, and to me, a very particular way of sourcing the linguistic material for them. So anyway,
If you're hitting a wall creatively, dreams are an
yeah,
extraordinary resource. You can
yeah,
even
for sure.
rip off other people's dreams. I
Right. Yeah.
Right,
really,
right.
if somebody's told you a
Mm,
dream, I did it. I did it
that
with
sounds
this
good.
play.
Yeah,
There's a whole bit in my play about Bigfoot putting Mussolini on a meat hook over and over again. And this is a
yeah,
dream that somebody I know had, and I wrote it in. And she was very
right.
flattered. I asked her,
Oh,
I
that's
said,
cool.
hey, I hope that's okay if I keep. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Really?
yeah,
So
yeah.
Berryman was like doing that thing where every night you're Was he
Yeah, he
writing
would
down
wake.
his dreams? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
and he was analyzing, so he was trying to figure out what they actually meant, you know. Yeah, he did that for months and months and months. And one point when he was in the when they first put him in the Who's Who, you know, that book that's like whatever, if you get past niche internet micro celebrity, they ask you to be in the Who's Who.
I think it's called Wikipedia, Brad.
Wikipedia. Yeah, now it's
Hmm.
Wikipedia. But in his day as Who's Who, and he listed it as a pastime dream analysis. That was years later. So he's certainly thinking of in this mode. Um,
And the way dreams kind
let's go
of
ahead.
the way they kind of make, they don't make sense, right? That there's just kind of all the kind of raw subconscious being smashed together and kind of churned out into like visions or ideas or whatever. I mean, I want to hear what you guys think about this too. I've been on this track for a while where it's just kind of like, art creation is raw subconscious, but it's kind of shaping that, right? Like you take that raw subconscious, or you could say a dream, like, and
Mhm.
putting it into something and kind of shaping it into some, beautiful curves and things like that. But like,
Mhm.
that's where the kind of like that is art creation. Like, and I think sometimes people confuse it where they just think getting the raw subconscious coming out of you is all you have to do. Where it's just like, oh, this
No,
idea went
right.
to this idea, and you see these kind of large associative leaps, particularly in contemporary poetry, where it's like, oh, it just came to me. It's like, yeah, that's how it works. It just comes
Right.
to you, but then you have to kind of shape that thing into
Right.
something, right? Like,
That's
because
that's step
yeah,
one. That's step
yeah,
one.
exactly,
And
exactly, yeah,
and and if you are able to open up that valve and good stuff comes out, like you're ahead of the game for sure. But that to me is the first step. Like that's that's if you're a painter, that's you just bought paint at the store. That's what just happened.
right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, do you have another dream song you'd like to share with us? And we can I'm kind of liking this. We just read these and stuff comes out. Yeah.
Oh yes, oh yes. Well, I guess like, yeah, we can jump around,
Yeah.
Just a
jump
couple of
around.
just three middle-aged men reading poetry.
Hey, I saw
Listen,
somebody tweet the other day, and so it's official. They said there's nothing manlier than writing poetry. So
goddamn right. Goddamn right.
yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
extraordinarily masculine.
Yeah, it
I
is.
reject everything that ever happened to me in any public school setting. No, it
I
actually is
remember.
awesome. I'm very glad
Yeah.
it's cool that we can make room for this. Genuinely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
remember
yeah.
when I was bar backing in my 20s, smoking cigarettes out back with the cooks and shit. And they were like, it was like a Mondays were slow or whatever. I'd bring a book. I brought like a Baudelaire book because I was that guy, right? And
Hmm. Hmm.
this cook who was like working in the back, and he was just like, "What are you, gay?" And I was just like, I started to learn to just be like, "Yeah, like, like, yeah, of
Yeah, just
course,
own it.
like,
Yeah,
yeah."
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, absolutely. Dream Song 29 is also like
Yeah.
fantastic. And this is one where they a lot of critics, and I've seen people write on this where they want to tie it into kind of the confessional aspect to it. And maybe there is something to that, but you know, we'll see. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
There sat down once a thing on Henry's heart, so heavy, if he had had 100 years and more, and weeping, sleepless, and all them time, Henry could not make good. Starts again always in Henry's ears, the little cough somewhere, an odor, a chime. And there is another thing he said there is another thing he has in mind. Like a grave Siamese face, 1,000 years would fail to blur the still profiled reproach of ghastly, with open eyes, he attends, blind. And all the bells say, too late, this is not for tears, thinking. But never did Henry, as he thought he did, end anyone and hacks her body up and hide the pieces where they may be found. He knows, he went over everyone, and nobody's missing. Often, he reckons, in the dawn, them up. Nobody is ever missing.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, there's a biographical way of reading that where this is about the anxiety of waking up after a blackout, right?
Yeah.
Just that like, oh shit, what did I do? What happened? And he certainly was a man who had his share of blackouts. Um, so but it's also like I kind of forgot how intense that last stanza is. Um, and hacks her body up and hide the pieces where they may be found. he knows he went over everyone and nobody's missing. That's that's hard. That's pretty hardcore. Um, hmm. There once, and also the beginning of, I mean, the beginning of it is, I mean, there sat down once a thing on Henry's heart, so heavy if he had 100 years and more, and weeping sleepless in all them time, Henry could not make good. I love that.
And
I
the third
mean,
person, yeah, like the kind of, who was actually doing third person? I mean, I haven't gone back and looked through all of it, but I was like, who was using this kind of like third person for a character in like poetry like this? Like it was always usually kind of like, I guess it would mostly be first person for poetry in terms of storytelling, but I guess they were using like third person in like epic storytelling or epic poems, but just they wouldn't mention it this way where you're referring to the person speaking as themselves, Henry's heart.
right. Right. And
Yeah.
I think, well, and there is, I do think there's, there's a confessional aspect, it's large C confessional aspect to this, but I don't know. I mean, of all of those sort of big name confessional poets, I mean, Berryman feels like the only one who has like a consistent character who's not Berryman, it
Right.
seems to me. And I guess there is some sort of psychic distance there for sure. And pretty much any character, if you make them up and you spend enough time with them, sort of like you said, Andrew, it's partially him at least, even if he's intentionally widening it out to sort of capture more. But um, yeah,
And just like the kind of nagging that I think he captures, right? Like in this way, it's about like kind of like one, I guess, wanting to kill somebody, but just kind of the nagging of like anything. You could open that up broader to be kind of this thing that keeps chiming, right? A little cough somewhere, an odor, a chime.
Mhm.
Um, it just kind of hits is these constant things that plague us. I mean, that is living, right? That is life. Like being human, I guess, is just having these little things that keep chiming back years later. Um, like especially about this one. I mean, it's always kind of about women in this sense too, I would
Mhm.
say. Like he was obsessed with women. Supposedly he had very bad luck with them like his whole life.
Yeah.
Uh, as
Yeah,
many of you out there probably know what that's like.
yeah, he's I mean, it's funny because he had a handful of women who, fell in love with him pretty hard, but he was not. I mean, when you're drinking the way that he did for the years that he did, you end up crossing a lot of lines, I think, and
Just own your own personal trail of tears. It was
right,
a
right.
trail of tears in your beers kind of a
Yeah,
situation. Yeah.
yeah,
Nobody
Did
is ever missing. Yeah.
yeah.
yeah. Oof. Did he must have suffered anguish as a consequence of the alcoholism.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it ruined. He was married 3 times. It ruined 2 of his marriages and alienated him from his first, all of his kids, but primarily his first son, Paul. His wreck destroyed his health. I mean,
Yeah.
he was 57, but he looked like he was about 77, maybe. He was not in good shape and in the
Yeah.
hospital a ton of times, like dozens and dozens of times in the hospital. So.
Yeah. I mean,
So
as it always
yeah,
does, right? How could you not have that ruin every relationship in your life, really? There's that
over
famous
time,
story
yeah.
of like, he gave some reading at some university, and like, how you guys know how that works, where it's kind of like a lot of times, like, you're just kind of staying with somebody, like, you just kind of either you get a hotel room or you're just kind of staying with one of the professors that offer open up their house to you.
Mm,
That happened, and like, he came downstairs, like clearly hungover, and just started pouring himself tumblers of whiskey, like at the breakfast table, and like this guy, the guy that had him over, like some other professor was
right.
just, he had kids there. They were feeding breakfast to the kids, like, and he's just sitting there drinking. They're like, "Do you want any eggs or anything?" He's like, "Oh, no, thanks. Like, no,
No,
thanks."
just
He just
this.
keeps down like
Just
4 of
this.
them. Yeah. And then they're like, "All right, well, it's time to
Rough.
go to the university now." And he's like, "Okay, yeah." Like takes him around.
Yeah. Yeah. Highly recommend nipping it in the bud before you're having 4 double whiskeys to get steady in the morning.
Yeah.
That's not a
Yeah.
good place to be. Does not end well. Mm.
Let me read one. This is
Please,
70
yeah.
74. Henry hates the world. What the world to Henry did will not bear thought. Feeling no pain, Henry stabbed his arm and wrote a letter explaining how bad it had been in this world. Old Yellow in a gown might have made a difference. These lower beauties and chartreuse could have mattered. Kyoto, Toledo, Benares, the holy cities, and Cambridge shimmering do not make up for, well, horror of unlove, nor south from Paris driving in the spring to Siena and on. Pulling together Henry, somber Henry woofed at things. Spry disappointments of men, enticing adorable children, miserable women, Henry mastered. Henry tasting all the secret bits of life. Yeah. Not as well known of a one, but like I just sort of like the life friends is boring. Henry hates the world right off the top, right? And this is the thing. This isn't like a nihilistic hatred. This is like it's kind of the only it's sort of to me the way I read it is like it's it's the kind of hate you can only come to when you actually love the thing, but it like disappointed you or you disappointed it or something like that, right? This isn't like the world is empty and meaningless. It's like the world is too painful, is what it is.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the recurring images,
That's
I mean, this is through all like 385. Like the dog keeps coming back with kind of wagging
hmm
tails and kind of dogs. And I don't know enough
hmm
about that. Like, does he was like a big dog guy or not? I don't know.
I don't really think so, but
But it's just it's
maybe
great.
just
Yeah.
symbolically resonant for him or whatever. But yeah.
Heaviness. Yeah. The kind of
Yeah.
heavy feelings too, I guess, is like the kind of like weighing down the kind of suffocating feelings of like, yeah, life hates the world, extreme love, extreme sadness. And I guess it's like, I guess we're just
Yeah.
describing the life of an alcoholic, right? Like extreme love, extreme happiness, extreme
hmm
sadness. Like that's all you feel. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a way to kill boredom, that's for sure.
yeah,
Dr drunks are not bored.
That's
You
true.
got a lot going on.
Yeah, a lot going on. Yeah,
You know,
that's true.
there's a lot of feelings in that a handle of vodka.
That's right. That's
Hmm.
absolutely right.
yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
can I read I want to read like a little interview about the Dream Songs. It's just like a paragraph, but it's an interview with John Berryman. This was in the Massachusetts Review in 1970. So I think this was on the eve of them. So the Dream Songs were published in two pieces and then kind of normally they're published together. There was 77 Dream Songs that came out in I think 1964 and then was it 1969 I think the second bit which is actually a lot bigger came out which was his called at the time His Toys His Dreams His Rest I believe. Um anyway, this is an interview in the Massachusetts Review in 1970 talking about the Dream Songs. Berryman says, quote, all the way through my work is a tendency to regard the individual soul under stress. The soul is not oneself. For the personal I, me with a social security number and a bank account never gets into the poems. They are all about a third person. I'm a follower of Pascal in the sense that I don't know what the issue is or how it is to be resolved. The issue of our common human life, yours, mine, your lady's, everybody's. But I do think that one way in which we can approach it by the means of art, coming out of Homer and Virgil and down through Yeats and Eliot, is by investigating the individual human soul or human mind, whichever you prefer. I couldn't care less. I have tried, therefore, to study two souls in my long poems. Um, yeah, so yeah, so I mean, I definitely feel that, like the soul, the regard the individual soul under stress, and there's something there's something refreshing. There's so much like sort of content as we all live on the internet now. It's constantly being sort of thrown at you. That's like, okay, well, if you just get enough sleep. Now, what you need to do is you need to like take this supplement and you sleep at this time and you do this thing. And then if you do this thing and then you invest this and you invest in this thing, you get this kind of return and like, blah, 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 blah. And there's like this 75 bullet point list. And if you do all that, you'll be good. Right. And it's like, and you read, you know what I mean? Like they're like, okay, that's how there's a certain thought process of like that's how you're going to cope with the individual soul under stress is you're going to follow all this like stuff, right? And Berryman's is just like it's it's just so raw and refreshing, and like the pain is he allows all the space for all of the pain, right? It's not about like, oh,
It's sort
you're
of it's hard to imagine Berryman going on Rogan.
right.
He'd honestly probably be
Right.
great on Rogan. Yeah.
He probably would be, but you understand what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're not
Yeah.
optimizing for anything here.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what I'm saying. And so, yeah. And that's not to say that there's nowhere in that 75 bullet list of things to do there isn't something worth doing, but it's nice to step away from that kind of stuff or realize that you're being battered with it all the time by reading some John Berryman and being like, oh yeah, like the human soul is rough and wild and kind of drunken, even either actually or metaphorically, right? And there's a mess. There's a mess to deal with. Life is fucking messy. And I feel like there's not a lot of voices. I feel like everything is so cleanly done. Not everything, but so many things are so cleanly done now that John Berryman kind of is a slap in the face to all of that. So anyway,
And I wonder how much of that is an act too. Like you see these people that are like, especially that are they're always trying to sell you something like the morning routines or something like that, or oh, you need to meditate more, or you need to do something like this. And it's
yeah,
just like, yeah, how happy are you? Like, like
right,
how happy are you right now? Like, you never get sad. Like, it's not,
yeah,
it's sold as some cure all where you'll never be
right,
sad, but it's like, well, it won't go away. It just
right,
like management things or whatever. But yeah, I
yeah,
always wonder about that too. I mean, the thing about meaning, I mean, that's life, right? Like everybody's obsessed with this stuff. Like even poems like this, well, what does it mean? What does it mean? And it's like, well, I guess it can mean whatever you want it to mean. And I mean, yeah, there's some
yeah,
context. Obviously, you don't want to go out of nowhere like with
right,
that.
right,
But everybody's just in that boat. And like everybody's, I don't know. I mean, I see a lot of this stuff. I mean, obviously, but most people's interaction now with the world is just through a screen. So you're just scrolling and you're seeing other people say stuff. And then you
mm,
get these ideas in your head like, oh, this is going to be better. This is going to fix me or something. I see like, I mean, the kind of like religious revival that people are going through and stuff like right now and all. And there was this guy that I like who he has a podcast, Alex O'Connor. He's kind of like an atheist type figure, but he always says like people keep asking
right,
him like, what do you find for meaning? And he's just like, people keep coming to me asking this as if I have an answer. Like he's like, I'm in the same boat as you. Like I don't
mm,
know. Like, I'm
right,
searching for something. He's like, I haven't found it in that, and
yeah,
yeah, and then
yeah,
Berryman kind of lays it all bare there with this, and that I mean that is the kind of I don't want to say it's all art because obviously it's not, but
right.
it's kind of at the basis of it, like when we're trying to sort things out one way or another, like the deep feeling, your sadness or happiness or whatever it is, and like
Well,
yeah,
and
the
this
horror
is
of unlove, yeah,
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that great poetry can kind of excel at is it can just stare right back at that rather than trying to get away from it somehow, right? It's like you're not going to run away. While you're reading this poem, you actually got to look into the gaping maw of that thing, right?
Somebody last night on Twitter was asking what the use of literature is, and that's always going to come up. And Brad,
Yeah.
you had the always appropriate reply that the purpose of literature is literature. And
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
I said, and this didn't get much love, and I don't actually give a damn. But I said, literature, among other things, is a gym for empathy,
Mm.
and I
Hmm.
think there's something
beautiful,
to that.
yeah.
Like if you're trying to sell the bros on literature, right?
Right.
Like, hey, maybe get out of your own head for a minute, go sit in somebody else's head for a minute,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's probably good for you
Right.
to do that.
Right.
I think. I
100%,
think
dude.
there's some. Mhm.
Podcasts like
Yeah.
this, we're winning the bros, dude.
We
We're
are.
winning
Oh,
the
hey,
bros over. Like,
listen.
That's the
That's
point.
all we have. We have no female listeners. A woman has never listened to Art of Darkness. No, we
That's
know
not
they're out
true.
there.
My
That's
wife
not true.
listens
I know.
sometimes. Yeah.
No, but yeah, no, it's good. I mean, and it would be great if there was a meaningful renaissance in masculinity or even just let's just say male readers of literature and poetry would be, I think it would be really good for the culture, such as it is, what's left of it.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think there is. I think, we've talked about this before. This is sort of a sidetrack, but I think part of the problem is that like the mainstream publishing houses have just decided that it was an uncapturable market. That's been part of the issue. And so I think most bros who read are reading stuff that's 20 years or plus old
Oh
for the
yeah.
most part,
Mm,
And
yeah.
for people out there curious, I guess everybody listening to this is already kind of into literature, but it's just kind of, I mean, it's a great way to get laid too. If you struggle to get laid, if you're
It is a
recite
way.
a poem. Yeah. Recite
I
a
have
poem.
said this. I have
Yeah.
said this. I mean, the PUA guys, but like, no, you want to have success on that front, young men. Develop a genuine interest in literature, poetry, and theater. You
Yeah.
will. You're going to be okay. You're going to make it.
True.
You
It
know,
has to
don't
be
do
genuine. Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be
And
genuine.
it's
And
right. And
surprise,
it's not a
you'll.
trick.
No, it's not. Just be
Yeah.
interested, and you'll be interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 You can also be a war guy. You can read all about war and planes and
It's
bombs and
It's true.
but then also like pick up a book that was written like if you're a World War One head, go pick up some Conrad, like go pick up some
Yeah.
stuff that was what was going on in their heads, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's how all the
Yeah.
boomers got laid. Yeah. They were just like
Hey.
really into World War II and stuff, the Civil War. And like,
Now the question is, has anybody ever gotten laid?
And they're still
from
fucking
Netflix?
us.
Yeah. Has anybody ever gotten laid from watching Netflix
Well,
Exactly.
I don't know. Well,
as a like a pastime, right?
that's
No,
like the
that's
end
never
goal
happened.
is you're trying to get to the
Yes.
Netflix and chill.
No, you watch it
Yeah.
with them. That's a different thing. I'm saying
Right,
being like,
right,
I've watched
right.
I've watched a lot of television. Like, that
Yeah,
doesn't-
right.
That doesn't
That,
work.
that's true. That's really not that impressive, is it?
No, it's not.
because everybody
It's not.
does that. Yeah. Everybody
we
watches
may.
a shitload of TV. I watch
Yeah.
a shitload of TV. Like, you know, like,
Right.
We found our grift, fellas.
Andrew, share with us. Share with us. We're kind of winding down the main portion of the show. Share with us another dream song, if you
All
don't
right.
mind.
let's see. I was what was I doing here? Okay, yeah, let's number 65 and 66. When I was reading through this again, I was like, man, these two right on the same page here. Where the fuck was I?
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Where I was reading through this, and it's funny because, having like a book like this that I've had since undergrad, essentially, and I go back to from time to time, there's all kinds of markings and shit in it. Like I've
Right.
marked up pages, and reading it this time, I was laughing at some of my notes, from like my younger self and stuff. But these two were like ones that I didn't even mark at all. I was like, I guess I didn't notice them when I was younger, man, and I just didn't understand or what was happening, or it was like, oh, I'm not as impressed with those as I would like something as straightforward as like Dream Song 14 or something,
Yeah.
like Friends
Yeah.
is boring. But when I was reading it this time, I was just like, man, these poems are fantastic. Like, I mean, they're all fantastic, but I was just like, all right. So Dream Song 65. A freaking ankle crabbed his blissful trips. This whiskey tastes like California, but is Kentucky. Like Berkeley, where he truly worked at it, but nothing broke all night. No fires, one dawn, crowding his luck. Flowed down along the cliffs to the Big Sur when Henry Miller's box is vomit green and Henry bathed in sulfur, lovely, hot over the sea, like Senator Cat, relaxed and sober, watery, as Tivoli, sir. No Christmas jaunts for fractured cats. Hot dog. The world is places where he will not go. This winter tide or again. Does striding edge block while the sky is then? When Henry with his mystery was 2 and 20, high on the hog. And this like
Like all the
the
animal
internal
metaphors.
rhyme. That's like, yeah, like
Yeah.
the internal
Yeah.
rhyme that's rapping with that. Like kind of man.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, and then there's like a couple just like laced through there, like the world is places where he will not go, that are just like, damn, okay. Like that's somebody would write that down in their notebook, right? Yeah.
No Christmas jaunts for fractured cats, period. Hot dog. Like kind of, and that just raps with like the rhythm of it as well. I mean, just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. About 66.
And 66 was the one I noticed. You'll notice with these kind of like open-ended parenthetical was the ones that I was just like, what is happening with this? So yeah, I want to ask you guys about this where
No.
All virtues enter into this world. A Buddhist doused in the street, serenely burned. The Secretary of State for War, winking it over, screwed a red-haired whore. Monsieur Capovilla mourned, what a week. A journalism doggy took a leak against absconding coon, but take one virtue, without which a man can hardly hold his own. The sun is the willow, shivers itself and shakes itself green yellow. Abba Pinman groaned over the telephone when asked what that was. How feel a fellow when how feel a fellow then when he arrive in fame but lost, but affable, top shelf, quel sad saman. He hardly know his selving, that a man. Henry grew hot, got laid, felt bad, survived, should always reproach himself. And we have, I guess, the kind of yellow green kind of coming back in there too.
Yeah.
Vomit green, yellow green. Uh, Always, I guess we didn't talk about it either. Like his references, he takes a lot of shots at like writers he likes and doesn't like. Like Rilke is one he like takes a lot of shots out in this. But also like just the parenthetical in the first line and the very last line, they're like the kind of like open-ended.
Yeah,
And
I don't know. I don't know what to make of that either. I have to imagine because I know that he did sometimes he like put an extra space between words like when he wanted you to pause. So I have to imagine I would imagine that it's some kind of more of an auditory cue than than a meaning cue. Not that it wouldn't have any significance to the meaning, but I don't know what effect that would have. I mean, you don't have an open parentheses, but you put a closed parentheses at the end of the line. I don't know what to make of that exactly. But it's also, if you look at the punctuation of that line, it goes, okay, single quotation
Well,
mark.
isn't he call well, go on,
Um,
Brad.
Go ahead. I was just going to say,
Well, I mean,
go ahead. Sorry. You had an
doesn't
idea.
it repeat itself? So I mean, it should always reproach himself. All virtues, isn't it? Doesn't it seem to be? It seems to be creating like a round where it wants to go
right.
back on itself, right?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think
100%,
you're
yeah.
right. Yeah.
Kind of starting where it's like a circle almost where you're starting where it's already going around and then you're
Mhm.
ending where it's already going around too.
It's like
Yeah,
the
that was my
Joycean
best
move.
guess. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's
there's
interesting.
parentheses all in this thing, but they're all closed off except for those. And even like
Right.
even in the second stanza, the kind of colon parentheses, like
Yeah,
almost
what is that?
redundant. Like what, like but like
Yeah,
yeah.
what is that about? That is strange.
Yeah,
Colon
it almost seems like
parentheses.
you could,
Huh.
and you could almost turn it into like a little play where, two. Brad, you read what's inside the parentheses. Start from the top, and I'll
Okay.
read what's not.
Okay. All virtues enter into this world.
A Buddhist doused in the street, serenely burned, at the Secretary of State for War, winking it over, screwed a red-haired whore. Monsignor Capovilla mourned, what a week. A journalism doggy took a leak against absconding coon.
But take one virtue without which a man can hardly hold his own.
The sun in the willow shivers itself and shakes itself green-yellow.
Abba Pimmon groaned over the telephone when asked what that was.
How feel a fellow then when he arrive in fame but lost, but affable, top shelf, Kelsad Samain, he hardly knew his selving.
That a man
Henry grew hot, got laid, felt bad, survived.
should always reproach himself.
And then
Yeah.
read the top, read back to
Oh
the
yeah,
top.
all virtues enter into this world. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
Something.
know.
I like
I'm
that.
just riffing.
It's like
there's
staging.
stuff going on,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, yeah,
I like
it's
that.
just like
Think-
back and forth and kind of, who knows?
I guess this is the next theater project, Kevin. This
No.
is, yeah.
Hell
Stage and
no.
dream songs.
Nope. I can't listen. I'm clutching to my sobriety far
Right.
too much. to
Right.
go
That's a
and deal-
good point,
to
man.
go and deal with Berryman.
Yeah.
but no,
yeah, but to go
that would
spend
be
a year dedicated to John Berryman. That's
Nope.
That's
not gonna
yeah.
happen. Nope. I got about 90 minutes for Berryman every 3 or 4 months, and that's what I got. But this stuff is amazing. It really is like
And the
wild.
call and answer, like like reading it that way really does give like the call and answer. Like I mean, circle back to like kind of the beginning of this conversation with kind of the Henry and the Mr. Bones kind of talking back and forth. There's like the speaker, there's Henry, there's Mr. Bones, then like even the characters that populate all that. Like, I mean, there is that kind of, it's so complete within itself. Like even, I mean, I know he talked about this often as like he thought of the dream songs as one poem, you know. You know, I don't know if I buy that, but like they
It's a
do
little
kind of
cute,
build
but
on what, yeah, like they do kind of
yeah.
build on one another. Like as you're reading through, especially when you read like all of them in like a row in like a book like this, where you kind of they do kind of add to the lore every time you're going turning the page. There's another addition to like the story. If it, you know, to call it a story is generous, but it's just kind of the theme and stuff. You're just adding to it. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's another
It
brilliant aspect of Berryman and his dream songs. Yeah.
it does feel like it's a stream that's always running, and when you read it, you're like dipping your head into it, and then like it seems, yeah. As much or more than anything else I've read, it feels like the dream songs are sort of happening behind my head all the time. It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, let's come back on the After
Yeah.
Dark. I know you're going to have some stuff for Patreon and Substack, patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod, substack.com/@Art of Dark Pod. Support the pod. Please do.
Yes,
We need your
please do.
support. We want to keep
Support
doing
Art
this
of
for a long
Dark.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Listen, this is an incredible sentence or whatever it is. The Secretary of State for War winking it over screwed a red-haired whore. Come on. Come on. That's a
It's
banger.
That
What do
is
you
You're
have?
not going
What
to
do you
get that
have?
on any other podcast except
No,
here.
you're not.
Come
You're
on,
not.
man. And Brad, what do you have? What are we going to do on the After Dark?
We're going to talk a little bit. I mean, I want to continue this conversation. I want to ask Andrew and Kevin and I guess myself, like, do we think, because Berryman comes from sort of the capital C confessional school of poetry, but he also comes from this particular generation of American poets who all lost their freaking minds. And so I want to talk about what is this connection a little bit between madness and poetry? Like, if you want to be a great poet, should you lose your mind? Maybe. I don't know. And I want to talk a
Hell
little
yeah.
bit about the life and work briefly, like a few minutes, but I've got a little thing teed up about Delmore Schwartz, close friend of John Berryman, great poet, and an unfortunate case. If you know anything about him at all, this might be interesting. If you don't know anything about him, I promise you it's a fascinating story. So join us.
Yeah, Brad Kelly, an unfortunate case. There's your biography. This is, let's close out the main episode. And Andrew, thank you so much. Actually, first, where can people find you? Give your plugs
Yeah, patreon.com/heavyboard. I also do it through the Substack, andrewwittstadt.substack.com. You guys gave me that idea. Yeah. So
Okay,
I
good.
do
All
both,
right.
whichever.
I didn't know you were on there. We'll follow
wherever your
you for
credit
sure.
card's already set up, just go, and you can click subscribe. I'm at Andrew Wittstadt on Twitter, at Heavy Board Pod on almost every social media except TikTok, at Heavy Board Podcast. But yeah, you'll find me. You can just type in my name too, and you'll usually find stuff, either this podcast or some of my genius level poetry, which is out there.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Very
Hell
nice.
yeah.
I like it. I like it. So I'm going to listen to Heavy Board tonight after we're done recording. We're going to come back for the After Dark. We do this After Dark as bonus for patrons. This is fun. This is my friend Evan Gellian. It's Evan_Gellian_69 on the Bird website.
Nice.
I didn't get permission to do this, but whatever, he just tweeted because my quote tweet about literature, right? So the first the original poster was, "What do you think literature is for? To feel less alone seems too sentimental. To axe the inner ice, not realistic. Blah blah blah." And then to which I replied, "Literature is a gym for empathy, among other things." And Evan, and I like this reply, wrote, "Literature serves two purposes. One, to entertain me as I get droopy-eyed in bed. Two, to stare at me and serve as a reminder that I no longer have free time."
Ooh. Okay. Yeah.
We'll be back.